Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I am your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented writer, Mark Russell. Thank you so much for being here, Mark.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career.
Well, I'm a primarily comic book writer. I've also written non-comic books. I'm probably best known for titles like The Flintstones, Superman Space Age, Not All Robots, Snagglepuss, and Second Coming.
So, how did you start writing?
Well, I've been writing for as long as I can remember. Even when I was a kid, I would write things just on like notebook paper at home. I had like a little notepad full of like short stories, most of which were terrible. But
Mhm.
I think that that's the way you start as a writer. You start not realizing how terrible you are, then gradually you get experience enough to realize this is really bad. And
Mhm.
then from that, if that is enough to stop you, you keep writing, and it eventually starts to look better, starts to get better to you.
Do you have any like examples of those terrible stories you wrote when you were younger? Do you
Oh
remember any?
gosh. Well, and some of them weren't even when I was younger. Some when I was, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But but yeah, one thing I tried to write like a Peanuts like cartoon about a cast of kids, and
Uh-huh.
then at some point it occurred to me that the big difference between my cartoon strip that I was drawing and the Peanuts was that all my kids are exactly the same. So it didn't have any of the didn't have any of the feeling of being real life or being like a collage of characters the Peanuts had. But when I was drawing it, I was just having fun drawing it. I didn't realize that was a problem. It wasn't
Mhm.
until I tried to actually read it as a reader that I realized this is actually pretty boring. But I think that's what writing is. It's realizing how your previous writing was kind of deficient and then fixing it in your head so you're better the next time around.
I feel like a lot of people start out by kind of imitating the art that they admire, you know?
Exactly right. Yeah, no, you start out being very derivative and trying to remake what you've seen. And
Mhm.
that's natural. That's completely normal because you don't know where else to start. None of us is kind of born into a vacuum. We're all born into the culture, and the fact that we're enjoying things, the fact that there's things out
Mhm.
there we love is ultimately the wellspring from which we create our own stuff. The fact that there's things about the world we love. And to
Mhm.
me, that's always how you know you're onto something as a writer is if you're writing about something you care deeply about.
Yes. What do you think? I'm curious. What do you think of the statement where someone says that every story is already been told and it's about the execution?
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think what they mean when they say that is
Mhm.
that there's only a certain amount of things people want to hear about, or there's only a certain amount of things that people that really consume people. Like usually the fight for survival, or family,
Yeah.
or there's five or six sort of things that we really care about. But all the stories, the sort of permutations that each one of those things can take on are basically endless. So I think there's an infinite number of stories. What there are is just a very finite number of problems.
Yeah. Is there a certain type of story that you feel that you're more drawn towards?
Yeah, I like stories about systems, about societal or institutional systems, and how they break down. And I think all my stories are basically about human beings trying to survive against the backdrop of institutions or machinery that doesn't care about them.
Is this like based off of your real life experiences?
Yeah, well, it's based upon like my real life feeling about the world is that when we before we lived in civilization, when we were just like nomads and bands of travelers, we looked out for each other because we were all basically family. We knew maybe 20 people, and so
Yeah.
we took really good care of them because that was all we had.
Yeah.
We didn't have really any possessions. What we had are these people that were going to like help us and who told us stories at night and who were more valuable to us than any sort of spearhead or flint rock.
Mm.
And then civilization kind of replaced the feeling that we had for people with the things. It's like now we have access to an enormous amount of things, but the people that we really know, the people we really know well, we might be only able to count on one hand. Uh, Whereas the people that we come in contact with every day might number in the hundreds.
Yeah.
And when there's too many people, when you're dealing with thousands of people on social media or thousands of people on the street, of a city, they feel more anonymous. They don't feel like we're part of a tribe and this is my family and we got to take care of each other. They feel more like obstacles than your people who are helping you survive the world. And this is kind of what I like to write about: is trying to rediscover people around us as like family, as a tribe, and trying to sort of like realize just how futile the things are, how the things that we tend to care about in society can't possibly care about us because they're inanimate or because they're institutions. And that's where I think a lot of our feeling of dissatisfaction or the feeling that like life is meaningless comes from: the fact that we're caring for things that don't care for us back.
It might be also because I feel like a lot of people, I don't want to say people in power, I'd say people who have more influence, right? You kind of see them and then they're like rich. They have a lot of superficial um traits. And then I feel like a lot of people who look at that think, "Oh, I need this to be happy," or "I need this to be successful," instead of like realizing like I feel like for me the most important thing is obviously like my close friends and my close family, right? So even though I
Right.
am tasting a bit of superficial, like you kind of need money to survive, all this stuff.
No,
So
I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of this stuff. I like having things. I like having money as much as anybody. I'm not saying it's
yeah,
evil. I'm just saying that's not where your heart is. If you're investing your heart in those things, you're probably going to be disappointed because they have no capacity to love you back.
yeah,
Whereas all the things that that make you feel like you're part of a group and that you are cared for as much as you are caring for something are other people. And ultimately the things and the money and the superficial possessions that civilization bestows upon us, all of which I really like, those are only useful to the extent that we use them to take care of the things that really matter, which are other people.
yeah. Do you have an example of a story that is infused with that idea of yours?
Yeah, well, I think the one that sort of put my name on the map, and the one that's probably the best example of it, is the
Mm,
Flintstones cartoon I did, because or a comic book, because the reason why I was sort of drawn to that was that it was the story of the world's first civilization.
mhm,
So I kind of put how this civilization got things wrong for the rest of us, like things like religion and material possessions and colonialism. All of that started with bedrock, and all of these sort of cardinal sins that keep us separated from other people and keep us from having what we really want in life, which are stories around the campfire and meaningful relationships. That's what we really want, and everything else that civilization creates, if it's not helping to foster one of those two things, becomes a complete distraction.
mhm. I mean, I feel like a lot of things, it's like depends on the person, right? What's how do you explain? What's a waste of time and what's not a waste of time? Because, some people who prioritize career think that like watching TV or something is a waste of time, but personally, I don't think it's a waste of time because it's me spending time with my family, for example.
Yeah, I don't think you can really judge what anybody else is into.
Yeah.
I think you can only really judge how much you get out of it. And I think that's the key. It's like it could be a Laffy Taffy joke. It could be like a Roadrunner cartoon or whatever. That doesn't make it any better or worse than like say like a Dostoevsky novel or a good day of day trading at the stock exchange. What
Hmm.
matters is how much, not what you're putting yourself into, but what you're getting out of it. And
Yeah.
if you can get the same amount of joy and fulfillment out of watching a cartoon on YouTube as you could out of reading a Russian novel, then that's what you should be doing.
I agree. Do you have an example of like a specific story you wrote for the Flintstones?
Yeah, there was one I wrote which about the institution of marriage. That this is probably when people started really paying attention to the comic book. But
Mm,
in this specific issue, because they're prehistoric, marriage isn't really a thing. Marriage is a brand new thing. The people of the past did not get married. You know, marriage is sort of a byproduct of civilization. So Fred and Wilma are married, and this makes them kind of a minority group. And everybody else is like, "Oh, you knew this is you're just throwing in our faces. You shouldn't be married. You should you should just like procreate wildly like the rest of us." And it's sort of like flipping the idea of marriage on its back because people think of marriage as the traditional institution, and that's
yeah.
why they're against like changes to it. They're against like recognizing same-sex marriages or different types of marriages because they view marriage as being this incredibly traditional institution. But really marriage has only been around for like the last maybe 10,000 years, which is just a fraction of human of the amount of time humans have been around. So I wrote a story that was set far enough back that marriage itself was a brand new thing, and all the people that are using arguments to keep marriage from changing today were using arguments about why you shouldn't get married at all back then because we're like, oh, this is brand new. This wasn't around when I was a kid. It's like you're destroying the fabric of our society. So it was a way of kind of exposing the hypocrisy of sort of traditional of marriage traditionalists by setting it in a time when marriage was itself non-traditional.
Hmm. Did you have to do any research when you wrote the Flintstones?
Not really, because it's all just sort of fiction. It's all just sort of things that stories I want to tell. It's not really rooted in actual history,
Yeah.
or it's just sort of like stories I want to tell about where I think the human race has gone wrong, just sort of set in this sort of funny prehistoric town that didn't never really existed in history.
It sounds a little existential to me for some reason, because you're kind of
Yeah, I
questioning.
think it was. I think it was very existential because it very much was about like people finding like I mentioned earlier, how just how empty it is to start filling your life with stuff instead of people.
Mm,
And something that like they discover consumerism really early on, and Fred buys all these like cool appliances, most of which are like animals, and the appliances themselves are like living beings. There's like a pig who lives underneath the sink, who's the garbage disposal,
uh,
and his bowling ball, who is actually in fact an armadillo who curls into a ball so he can roll them, and he keeps his bowling ball in the closet, and the or no, he keeps the vacuum cleaner in the closet
mm,
when he's not using the vacuum cleaner. It's just a little elephant, but the elephant's scared of the dark. So at night when everyone's asleep, the elephant vacuum cleaner in the closet asks someone to let him out, and the bowling ball uncurls from his ball shape and lets the vacuum cleaner out of the closet, and the vacuum cleaner and the bowling ball end up becoming really good friends. But their friendship only can really exist at night when the humans are asleep, because when the humans are awake during the day, then they're vacuum cleaner and bowling ball. And I'm like, this is kind of what most of us go through, where most during the day we're appliances. During the day we're just the utility that we have to other people. We're not, our names were the barista or we're the accountant or whatever our job is. And only when we're not in these sort of economic roles are we actually able to sort of be ourselves and make real friendships and find connections with other people.
I never knew the Flintstone could be so deep. Oh my God. That's so interesting. I never saw it like that, but you're kind of right. But I feel like people should try to still be themselves in this like daily appliance job that honestly everyone
Yeah, if
is.
you can get away with it, I highly recommend it. I mean, I feel this is what one of the great things about being a writer is that my job is basically to be myself.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm in a way I've sort of escaped the closet in a little, but it's hard because people want, it's like somebody comes into a coffee shop and you're the barista. They want to see you as the barista. They want to see you as this role. which
Yeah.
has very little to do with who you are. So we spent most of our lives not really being seen.
Mm-hmm. But it's really like the beauty about being a writer and being a creative is that you get to write what you want and express yourself. But it's also really hard to like become uh like a sustainable professional, I'd say, right?
Oh yeah. No, it's the difference between being a wild animal and being a pet. When I
Yeah.
had a day job, I was a pet, which was nice in its own way because I had health insurance, I had a retirement. I had it's like being a hamster, and every morning someone puts new food in the bowl, and they
Hmm.
put a new water tube for you to drink from. But when you are an artist or a creative, it's like no one provides that stuff for you. You're more like a wild animal. You got to forage for this thing. So you gain a lot in freedom and from being, being able to like not kept in a cage, but you lose a lot in terms of like no one's putting food in your bowl. No one's taking care of you.
That's a really good way to put it. Don't be the pet guys unless you want to, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could have it both. I wish I could have the freedom to do and what I want during the day, and also be, have someone put food in the bowl, in the water,
Mm.
and change my sawdust. You know, but that's like a utopian future, I think.
I mean, but writing is your full-time job, right?
Yeah,
Were you doing a day job before this?
yeah, yeah. I was working a day job until about 10, little, probably 9 years ago. And I was writing on the side. And now I write. I've been since like 2018. I've been a full time writer.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's nice. It's also very scary, but it's the best job I've ever had
Why is it scary?
because you don't have more than like a few months. You don't. I don't know where the money's coming out from, like more than like 6 months out from now. So it's like I've got to keep finding work as I go. In a way, I didn't. When I had job security, I would.
Mm.
I figured I would just be doing this for the next decade.
Yeah.
But now I got to be constantly. You not only have to do the work of writing and turning in your scripts, but you also have to do the work of finding work, which is
Hmm.
kind of hard because you never know when that's going to dry up.
Can I ask like why you don't know if money's gonna come or not?
Well, just because you're dependent upon editors approving projects and like publishers wanting your work, and I think all of us will hit the point in which that sort of dries up, where we're not as hireable as we used to be, or the industry itself takes a hit and suddenly they're just not approving projects. And I think a lot of people are really worried about that right now, with one of the major comics distributors going down, and then all these trade tariffs that are going up especially between Canada and China, which are the two biggest printers outside the United States of comic books.
Uh-huh.
And so people are very worried about what impact this will have on the future of our art form and industry.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, and even if we survive it, it could be that there's a lot fewer comics getting approved in the short term, which means that some people are going to have a hard time making a living, probably at least over the next year or two.
Hmm. Do you have a plan B just in case?
No, I mean, I think I'll be okay for the rest of 2025, but I don't really know what 2026 will be like, and I don't really have a plan B, which is, yeah, kind of scary.
What was that day job you had before being a writer?
I worked at a public university. I worked sort of in the property administration wing of a university, which wasn't bad work. I didn't hate it. It just
Hmm.
wasn't what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah. Was there like a turning point that made you realize I need to start writing?
Yeah, and I think the turning point was I was getting more popular as a writer, and I was getting offers to write more comic books that I was having to turn down because I didn't have the time to do that and my day job. And so that I had to have sort of a serious conversation with myself. Well, why am I turning down the work I want to do work that I'm less excited about? And the reason was because this work comes with health insurance. This work comes with a retirement plan. And
Yeah.
I had to ask myself, well, what is more important, doing that or the writing? And I figured that if I was ever going to become the sort of writer, the quality of writer I'd always wanted to be, I really needed to at least have a period of my life where I did it full time.
Yeah.
And so I took the plunge and decided to leave my job and commit myself to writing full time. And it's worked out for, at least the last 8 years. So, but it's definitely a more tenuous existence. But I really love it. I mean, I not only like the writing, I
Mhm.
enjoy all the sorts of things that come with it. I enjoy traveling to conventions, which I couldn't do if I still had a real job,
Yeah.
and doing podcasts and stuff like that. So it's it's not just the writing, it's the whole existence that comes with it. And if I could do this forever, I would.
So, like, what other aspects change that you feel is like you didn't expect to happen, but you're glad it happened? The traveling?
Well, yeah, and I think one thing that I'm really sort of glad it happened is I no longer my schedule's my own, so I could write during the day and do errands and stuff later, or
Hmm.
I could, if I need to, I could go do errands during the day and then write later. One of the great joys in life for me is going to go see a movie at 11 o'clock in the morning, because I can get into any movie, brand new movie. I can walk in at 11 o'clock in the morning on like a Tuesday,
Uh-huh.
and it's just me and maybe like two or three old people in the movie theater, and I get the whole theater to myself. I can see brand new movies that way, and there's just something glorious about being able to like go to places when no one else can.
You know what's funny? I feel the same way when I go to the gym. There's no one there at like noon, and I purposefully choose to go at noon. So none of the equipments are occupied. It's just the staff that's like cleaning the place. And I
That's
just get
great.
oh, and there's no one, and there's silence.
Yeah, I do the gym too, and I try to go during the workday because I know that after 5 o'clock, when everyone gets off work, it's going to get really busy. So I try to go
Hmm.
in before then.
And then people tell me they're like, this is unemployment hour. I'm like, no, not for me. I can choose. I'm my own boss, guys. I don't need to be at the office, during the noon.
Yeah, if you stroll into like a business at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever, like a gym or whatever, there's this moment where they look at you like, is that an unemployed man or is he just rich?
Exactly. You can say you're rich, everyone will believe you. Maybe they'll respect you.
I think take one look at me and realize this is not a rich guy. They probably think, oh, this poor man probably lost his job and now he's going to the.
Jim, regain yourself. So I have to ask, what was that work that put you on the map that started having people approach you to write a comic?
The Flintstones was my big breakthrough. That was the one that got me a lot of offers to write other things. Snagglepuss also was, I think really sort of good for me. And the one that got me a lot of coverage in the press, good or bad, was Second Coming. And that one, I wouldn't say it made my career the way the others did, but I think a lot of people heard of me because of that one.
Can I ask what happened and
Yeah,
why?
Second Coming is about Jesus Christ returning to Earth and sharing an apartment with a superhero. It's literally about the second coming, and a lot of it is about like what the in the same way that Flintstones was about
Mm,
what civilization got wrong in at the when it, the in Bedrock. Second coming is about what Christianity has gotten wrong over the last 2,000 years. Christ comes back, and he's kind of shocked and appalled at what's been done with his teachings and his
mm,
religion, and he's mortified that people are wearing crosses around their necks, because that was how he was executed, and he
mm,
doesn't want it's like he like doesn't want to be known for that. And he finds it kind of triggering whenever he sees a cross because it's his worst, absolute worst memory, and yet that seems to be what everybody is kind of like parading around as a symbol.
mhm. And then what were people saying about that story?
Well, most of the controversy came before the comic book was even out. They just heard that because at the time it was going to be published by DC Vertigo,
Mm,
and people were running stories about how DC was doing this comic book about Jesus Christ, and it was going to be blasphemous and all this stuff. And so there was a lot of like anger from more conservative outlets. And I
mm,
talked to probably the national radios of 10 different countries, sort of explaining myself. But the irony is that everybody who was angry about it was angry before they'd even read a page of the comic. They had no idea what the comic actually said or was
mhm,
about. They just knew that they didn't like the idea. They didn't like the fact that I was writing this comic book about Jesus Christ. But when the comic book actually came out, all of the controversy just sort of evaporated because people could see, well, it wasn't, making fun of Jesus Christ, or it wasn't a mean spirited comic.
yeah,
Uh, if anything, he's the good guy. That, and I think also this sort of outrage, this sort of fury, has a very short shelf life because the very nature of it is of outrage is that you burn through your fuel really quickly and then you got to go on to the next thing.
yeah,
And it taught me very kind of early on in my career not to worry about that sort of thing, not to worry about what feels like at the time like angry mobs with torches and pitchforks,
mhm,
because it's really just a bunch of people sitting behind their laptop who read a story that they maybe get upset about for 15 seconds and then they're on to the next thing. So as long
mhm,
as you aren't killed within that 15 seconds, it's like it will
mhm.
move on and you can go about your life. In fact, if anything, I think it kind of helped me because it got the comic and myself a lot of publicity. It didn't really
Yeah.
do me any damage.
You know what? It was like it seems like a bad thing, but clearly you got a lot out of it. So
Yeah, no, if anyone wants to do that to me again, I would gratefully accept it.
I'm like, please do, get me more
Yeah,
engagement right now. I got the
right.
same
I
thing.
guess that's people would way people would look at it now. It's like, well, you're just driving engagement. Good for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny because I feel like, I mean, I'm not the same level, but I had like a comic I released on Reddit and it got a lot of hate comments underneath. I forgot
Really?
exactly why.
What was your
But
comic about?
it was just a teaser for my main comic about it's like kind of a sci-fi story. There's a poster on the back, actually, this one.
Nova?
Yes. So it's about a girl sent back in time by her mother to kill the person responsible for ending humanity. And then she finds out the person she has to kill is her own mother, so she can't bring herself to kill her. And I put a little like teaser where it was like a bit of a spoiler, but like, her mother was having kind of like a schizophrenic episode where a younger version of her daughter was like, "Oh, why did you kill me? How could you do this to me?" And everybody thought it was about abortions, no. But that's what
Oh
everyone.
wow. Wow. Oh
So I had so much hate. There was all this like discussion in the comments. Thankfully, the majority of people knew that it wasn't. They were like, this is not political. This is just the comic. If you read the comic, you know. But no one's gonna 90% of
right.
people didn't go to the main story, so they had no idea what they were reading. And
That's
I
a
just
big problem with social media. It's so easy to decontextualize like a
mhm.
panel or something, and if they just show one panel out of context of the rest of the comic, people will make assumptions about it that are completely out of line with what you're actually doing.
Exactly. So thankfully it died in like I think like less than a week. So I was glad, but that was the most engagement I've ever got in my life. So I
Wow.
think skyrocketed to like I think 1,000 subscribers all of a sudden. I was like, this is a lot. Thank you. So
Yeah, I think you should look at it sort of like having chicken pox when you're a kid.
yeah,
It's like, well, now you will survive the chicken pox. You're okay. And if it happens again, you know what to do, and you also know not to panic. That you will that the wave will pass over you.
exactly. And honestly, I feel like when really like kind of scary things happen, often like it follows with something really good. I mean, at least in my experience. Because it's like a
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. Life is like
Oh
I
no, go
think
ahead.
I was gonna say that I think life is either like a lesson or a gift. So that's how I see it.
That's a great way to approach it.
So I have to ask, You know how you said that the Flintstones is what put you on the map, right? I'm pretty sure Flintstone is an IP. Is it a public domain?
It's not public domain, but it's owned by Hanna-Barbera, which
Mm,
DC had the rights to publish Hanna-Barbera cartoons and comics when I was doing it. So I was
mm.
doing it with the approval of DC Comics and Hanna-Barbera.
Okay, okay. So how did you like get the job at DC? Was there work before that that made you get in?
Yeah, I'd written a comic book for them called Prez, which was about the first teenage president, a girl who gets elected president by Twitter because she goes viral at just the right time, running up to a presidential election.
Uh-huh.
And they liked that one well enough that they were willing to give me another chance, even though that comic got canceled. So at that same time, they just gotten the license for the Hanna-Barbera stuff. So they asked me if I'd want to write the Flintstones comic for them. So I said
Yeah.
yes. And I said, but I got to be honest, I don't really like the Flintstones cartoons. I don't think they're funny.
Yeah.
And Dan DiDio, who was the publisher at the time, said, "Oh, that's perfect. That way you won't be reverential. You can make your own story." And I took
Yeah.
that as an invitation to take the ball and run in my own direction with the Flintstones. And so that's exactly what I did. But I don't like writing something thinking, like, oh, I don't like this, so I'm just going to make fun of it, or I don't like this, so I'm just going to like do a a snarky job. What I like to do, even if I'm writing a property that I don't necessarily care for, I try to
Yeah.
find something about it that I really do care for, something
Yeah.
about it I find really compelling. And for the Flintstones, the thing that really sort of drew me in was the idea of the animal appliances were sort
Mm.
of real living beings with lives of their own who had to like live inside closets or underneath sinks during the day and can only be themselves at night. So I kind of like built the whole comic around this idea that not only are the appliances like that, but Fred and Wilma and Barney and Betty are like that too, where they're
Mm.
all trying to live according to these roles that people like have them for during the day, and then like, oh, they can only be themselves around each other and their friends. And also sort of the tragedy that they realize that they're not being seen as human beings during, by other people, but that they're also sort of doing the same thing to their appliances. They're doing the same thing to their appliances that they're complaining about other people doing to them, which is kind of, I think, also a good paradigm for civilization. We all know how we're being victimized by institutions, but we're not necessarily as aware of how we are participating in the victimization of others.
Mm-hmm. Damn, that's so existential. I love that. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to read.
I'm very proud of it. And it ran. And at the time, at the first when we started, I
Mm,
didn't want to. I just had a comic book canceled, so I asked Marie Javins, my editor. It's like, well,
mm,
how long do you think I could get away with writing the Flintstones before gets canceled? And she looked at the sales for issues number 1 and 2, and she said you could probably run for about 12 issues before you get canceled. So I said, okay, well, let's just plan right now to end it at 12,
okay.
and I'll just write it with the ending point at 12. And so that's what
Yeah.
we did, and it worked perfectly. I got to write it as like an actual story, so it
Yeah.
didn't just end in the middle of nowhere. And I knew about how much I had to talk about, and it's still one of my favorite like writing experiences. It's also where I got to meet and work with Steve Pugh, who's an
Mm,
artist I've worked on many times since then, one of my favorite artists in the business.
mm.
And so it was really life changing in a lot of ways.
So you don't draw any of your comics, right?
No, I don't really draw good enough to draw a comic book. I can draw a cartoon,
Uh-huh.
but I can't really draw good enough for like a comic book. The one time they actually let me draw for a comic book was they let me design some covers for my comic book rumpus room, but the only reason they let me draw the covers was because the covers were supposed to be children's art. They're supposed to be like images of like paintings that like children had made at the school. And so they figured, well, you're good enough to like pass for like a 10-year old, a 10-year-old painter, so you can do that cover.
Oh my God, that's kind of insulting. I'd be so
Yeah,
offended. But like, can you draw? You can draw this part because it should be easy. You know, a kid should
yeah.
be able.
It's like you're good enough to be intentionally bad.
So how did you get a job at DC?
They contacted me, which is kind of rare. It's not really advice, career advice you can give to people. Like just wait and DC will discover you. It doesn't usually
Yeah.
happen that way. But I had written two books, so I figured for a long time that they just read the books and they liked them. It wasn't until years later
Hmm.
I was doing a panel at San Diego Comic Con,
Hmm.
and and someone asked the same question. Well, how did you get in with DC?
Yeah.
And I started talking about these books that I'd written, and I said, and DC read them and liked them. And Marie Javins, who was my editor on Prez and the Flintstones, happened to be in the audience,
Mm.
and she interrupted the panel and said, "No, no, that's not true at all." And I was like, "It's not." And so I invited her up to come up to the panel and tell how it was. I started working at DC, and she said it had nothing to do with your books. You were writing this Count Chocula fan fiction on Facebook, and that was what she read and thought this guy should be writing comic books. So
That's so funny.
yeah, yeah, so it taught me a valuable lesson though. It taught me that everything you do is sort of a lottery ticket. So
Yeah.
always be writing, always be putting things out in whatever format you can, because you never know who's going to be reading it, what doors it's going to open.
You know, I also heard 50 Shades of Grey was also a Twilight fan fiction too. So you know,
That's true,
you never
right?
know. That's so crazy. Who's Count Chocula? Is that a like
The those cereals, those breakfast cereals,
that's what I
like
was thinking.
yeah, he's like the mascot for the chocolate one, and there's Frankenberry, who's
Uh,
like sort of the strawberry cereal, and then there's Booberry, who's Ghost, who is the mascot for the blueberry cereal. But I was writing these sort of like conversations between Count Chocula and Frankenberry and Booberry and Captain
mhm.
Crunch. Almost like they were characters in Game of Thrones, where they were talking about betraying each other, and stuff. And for me, it was just sort of a funny, like a gag.
Yeah.
Um, but they really, but a lot of people really liked them. And then, ironically, I gotta like turn this stuff these stories got me into comics, and just a couple years ago, I was able to turn these stories into a comic book itself. Where I have a comic book published by Ahoy called Serial, that is about these serial monsters.
Oh my God. That's so funny. What kind of conversations were they having?
They were the main thing was like Count Chocula didn't want to be didn't want people to discover that he was a vampire, because
Okay.
people didn't really know he was a vampire, and he knew that if they knew, they would probably kill him. But at the same time, he was
Mhm.
also really known for these elaborate breakfast parties where you'd have breakfast parties with cereal and pancakes and bacon, like you see in the commercials.
Yeah.
But having a breakfast party when you're a vampire is a really tricky thing because the sunlight kills you. So
Hmm.
he is like awake in the morning when a vampire is supposed to be sleeping in their coffin, and there's all these people in his banquet hall, and the sunlight as it comes in through the windows and begins heading towards him down the table begins slowly killing him. So he has to sort of like pretend that he's not dying, that he's not in pain, while
Yeah.
everyone eats breakfast. And then they all leave, and then the moment they're gone, rushes to his coffin and recovers,
Hmm.
uh, saving his life. But then um, one of the guests figures out that this is what's happening and decides to not leave, decides to stick around and try to make him, to see if he actually like dissolves as a vampire. And so that becomes like the early on, that's the conflict, like Count Chocula being some people finding out that he's a vampire.
Oh my God, that's so interesting. I guess I can't ask, like, did he end up dying or not? I guess I have to read the fun.
No, yeah, I won't tell you, but yeah, you should. The book is called Serial, so if you're
Real?
interested in finding out what happens to Count Chocula, yeah, read that.
Cereal. Okay. Where
Serial Sweet Darkness is what it's called.
what made you like, what compelled you to write that? Was there like, were you like watching serial stuff and you're like, I wonder if this Dracula has insecurities with
I
people?
think that was what it was. It was like just thinking about like, okay, well, you got this cereal mascot who's like a vampire, but a vampire never eats cereal because a vampire is always, asleep during the day.
Uh-huh.
A vampire never shows up for breakfast, so it just seemed like kind of a weird mascot for a breakfast cereal.
You know what's funny about that? I also kind of like got popular per se. There's a game called Among Us. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's like an online game where you're like this like little space nugget and one of you are the alien that kill is trying to kill other people and you're trying to figure out who is like the imposter, who's the alien trying to kill the other um I'd say like astronauts. And I would make like little short, like 60-second dramatic stories of that on like TikTok and Instagram. And that's what got me to I think like 100,000 like followers or something. And everybody really liked my sh short dramatic stories. So that's why when wrote my full dramatic story, people would come and read that, right?
Uh,
It's so interesting, like these like there's this like random IP, and you just put your own ideas into it and you put it out there and people are like, that's a good idea. And then yeah.
yeah, no, it's what we call cultural equity, right? It's like when you're writing your own stories that you made up from scratch, people don't know these characters, people don't know the premise, they don't know anything about it. But if you can write your stories, but write them with a starting point that people are familiar with, like the Flintstones or a video game or something, then people are invested and they
Yeah.
will listen to the rest of your story. So it's a good idea to write things that have some cultural equity with people that they're not starting 100% from scratch. They
hmm
have a base of knowledge going into your story of what it's going to be.
I feel like nobody think like has something from nothing though. There's always something that happens where you're like, oh,
Right.
now I have an idea, you know?
Right. That's very true. It's like we all it's all the recombinant DNA from our past experiences. That's the only
hmm
thing. All inspiration, all writing, all art comes from the like past experiences and other art forms that just sort of get filtered through our brain and through it's like made into a sausage. It's just sort of like put through a blender and you put it into a little sausage casing of your own making. And that's all we really do, but that's enough to make an infinite number of different flavors of sausage.
Yeah. Yeah, all the different ingredients.
Right.
Where
There's so many different combinations, we'll never hear all the stories.
Where would you say you get the most like ideas out of?
I think I get the most ideas out of like the news or hearing about things that are going on around the world. And then what I usually happens when I know I'm kind of onto something is when it like sort of inspires a metaphor where it's like, well, that's like this other thing uh,
hmm
that or it's like what if somebody took this to its natural extreme and did this? What if billionaires just built an island off the coast of the United States where they were not beholden to any of our laws. And then that's when I came up with the island or the idea for my Billionaire Island series.
hmm
But just you hear about reality is crazy enough, so you don't have to do too much more to take what's going on in the world and make it like fantasy, to make it science fiction.
Could you go a little more in depth with your billionaire? I know I heard it at the Comic-Con, but
About the Billionaire Island.
yeah.
Yeah, so basically there's this island called Freedom Unlimited or FU Island as the locals know it, where billion you can only live on this island if you're a billionaire. And if you're there as like a worker, if you're not a billionaire and you're there as like a service person, you have to wear like a collar around your neck, like a shock collar. So if you are wander too far away from your place of work, it shocks you. And if you're on the island and you're not a billionaire and you don't have the shock collar, they have these net worth detectors over the island. If they detect anybody who's not a billionaire on the island, the the um, the drones that patrol the island come and pick you up and carry you out to sea. So it's very enforced that this island's for billionaires only. And it tells the story of a journalist and a soldier of fortune who invade the island to break a big story about one of the billionaires who lives there, who is trying to like release this virus into the world that will make everybody else in the world sterile. Because his plan is to make it so that the human population starts declining rapidly, so that when the end of the world comes, there won't be 8 billion people trying to get on the shore of Billionaire Island. You know, that enough people will be dead that they will be able to successfully defend Billionaire Island. And so she's trying to break the story, and he ends up capturing her and puts her in like a hamster cage with other people who have crossed him. So they're all living in this hamster cage with sawdust on the ground, which again is also, as I've used it before, my
Mm.
metaphor for what it's like to have a job. You know, and
Yeah.
they have 3 catered meals a day, which are pretty good, and they get the little water tube refilled and the
Yeah,
sawdust
yeah.
changed. And so the people that are already in the hamster cage are kind of happy with it. They're like, I kind of enjoy it here. And they're all wearing, suits. They're all former employees of him.
Mm.
And she's the only one who's like, we got to break out. We got to go tell the world the truth. And the rest of them are like, I don't know. This is pretty good. I'm comfortable here.
Have you ever heard like people saying the industry or whatever, the workplace is a rat race?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not really a rat race. It's more of like a hamster cage.
You're right, because it's not, no one's chasing. It's more like everyone's feels like this is what they should do, and they don't like it, but they don't feel that they have to get out of it, right?
It's comfortable enough that you don't realize that it's actually a prison.
Yeah. So, what was the inspiration for this? What did you hear that was like, oh, I need to write Billionaire Island?
Well, the thing that sort of kicked off the idea was reading an article about a billionaire who was planning on actually like building an island off the coast of San Francisco. And that was the idea. They're going to get around like San Francisco's like building codes and San Francisco's like taxes and laws and stuff, and they can do whatever they want on this island. Now, it didn't pan out because it
Mhm.
turns out it's much harder to actually create a civilization than it looks.
Yeah.
But it got me to thinking, like, what would that actually look like if they were able to do this, and how would you police that it's really for billionaires only, you
Yeah.
know? And so it started begetting all these questions. Well, what if somebody actually chose to go through with this? What would that look like?
Hmm. How long does it take for you to write these kind of stories?
I can usually write a 20-page comic book issue, start to finish, in about a week.
That's so fast.
It's pretty fast, but you kind of need to work that fast if you're going to do it full time, because you got to keep it. You just need to do it to make the money,
Hmm.
and yeah, you got to keep the. But I kind of like it because I think I'm naturally, I like to write all day anyway.
Hmm.
So it's better for me to have a lot of projects going back and forth that I can work on at the same time. So if I get stuck on one, or if I feel like I'm getting writer's block, or I'm stuck in a corner on one, there's
Yeah.
always one or two more that I can move on to and work on those. And then while I'm working on those, my brain, my subconscious is quietly figuring out the solution to the first one that I stopped working on.
Yeah. So is that how you get around writer's block? Do you
Yeah,
ever?
that's absolutely 100% my cure for writer's block, and I think it would work for anyone. It's like if you find yourself having writer's block, it just means that you're sort of in a corner, and
Mm.
you just need to work on something else for a little while and let your subconscious work on a solution to your writer's block.
Do you ever get into like two blocks? Like you try to switch the story and you're also stuck on that one too. So you're like stuck on both. You're like, I don't know what to write anymore.
Yeah, it's possible, but I think also there's always something else you could be doing. So it's like, well, you could be writing a pitch for your next series,
Mm.
or you could be going back and rewriting something that you've already written and making it tighter. And usually when I do that, usually when I go back, if I don't know what to write next in a story, if I go back and rewrite something I wrote before, it'll create an idea of what else to write, or it will remind you like, oh, this is a possibility, and then then you can go forward. So there's really no excuse for not writing anything. I think it's just, how you want to, what there's some things that you work on that are more likely to get rid of your writer's block than others.
I like to go on a walk or a workout. That's when my brain thinks the most creatively. Because I don't listen to music. I just what I'm like listening to nothing. I listen to gym music and people like grunting or whatever. And then sometimes I look at a person, I'm like, I wonder what they're experiencing right now or what their story's like. And then that also gives me ideas.
That's
So,
great. Yeah. No, I think that's important for writers to sort of be open to the world around you, to like not be closed off to the world, but to sort of like absorb what's going on around you because you never know when the next idea is.
hmm Have you ever faced criticism and then actually like applied it?
Oh yeah, no, a lot. Because this is basically what an editor is there to do. An editor is there to
Judge
save you
you.
from yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like the best sort of criticism I get from an editor is
Mhm.
not really the criticism that I'm, from an editor. It's more the criticism you get from a reader, where it's just like, this didn't make sense to me, or I don't
hmm
understand why this character is interested in doing this. And a lot of times when you're writing, you understand the answers to the questions yourself, but you forget to write them down. You forget to put them in the story
Yeah.
so that a reader knows them. And it's so easy to get snowblind because it's like what you're trying to do, that you forget what the reader doesn't know. And so
hmm
it's really good to have an editor or a reader, somebody who's willing to be honest with you and say this didn't make sense, or this didn't work for me, because that's what tells you it's like, oh, the vision I have is
hmm
not making it onto the page.
All the time. I have that all the time. I think that's my biggest problem with my first comic. But I already wrote it and I already created like honestly 90% of it. So, but a lot of people do tell me like I have no idea what's going on in the first part. I'm like, guys, just be patient. Be patient. You'll understand. It just takes a while, but I think in my next story, I'm probably gonna take that criticism and try to make everything clear because I didn't intend to make people that confused, you
Yeah,
know?
unless it's like a mystery, unless it's like, finding out who the killer is, which
Yeah.
obviously you don't want to tell people right away. If it's not like something that you're planning for a big reveal, I would say always give people more information up front. Give them all the information you can up front, so they always feel like they're in good hands. They know exactly what's going on at,
Mhm.
in any moment in the story.
Have you ever worked on something with a co-writer?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the titles I was working on until recently was called My Bad, which
hmm
is about a superhero and a supervillain. And really, they're just like both rich guys who have too much time on their hands, who think they're superheroes or supervillains, but they're not really
Batman.
good. They're not really good at anything. Yeah. It's like an incompetent Batman versus an incompetent Lex Luthor,
Uh-huh.
but they sort of run afoul of each other. And half the story about the villain in his life
Uh-huh.
is written by my friend Bryce Ingman, uh, and then the story about the hero
Mhm.
is written I write. And the way this we've written three series of it, and the way it usually goes is that the first four issues are kind of like them leading their own sort of separate lives, and then the fifth one they sort of collide, and there's like a confrontation.
Do you ever get into a conflict with your writer? Because I do, personally.
Yeah, I mean it's there's not a lot to fight about because most of our stories are written completely separately, but we do
Yeah.
collaborate a lot on the one where, and we talk early on before the fifth one comes up, where we know that our stories are gonna collide into each other. We talk a lot about what that's going to be like, but this I think we have a pretty good working relationship just because we talk so early on about what the story arc of this series is going to be.
hmm I mean, I'm sure you know this story called Invincible, right?
Yeah.
So apparently, this is a bit of a spoiler. But apparently in the book, like the comic version, it took them 7 issues to find out that Omni-Man was the one who killed the Guardians of the Globe. And that apparently caused a lot of viewers to leave really quickly because they're like, "Oh, this is boring. This is just Mark Grayson's life. Like, why am I reading this?" Right?
Mhm.
So in the show, didn't want to risk that anymore, and
Right.
they instead put it in the very first episode. So
Yeah.
everyone's like,
No, I haven't read the series, but I saw the episode,
"Yeah, me
the
too."
first season of the TV show, and yeah, I think it was a good choice.
Right? So have you ever made compromises like that before to get the reader's attention?
Yeah, in fact, I've completely reordered the way a series has worked. It's like I put things like issues higher, closer to the front, just because I realized this is like sort of like going to this is like a bigger splash, or it's something that like tells people right away what this series is about.
So which one are you talking about?
Well, there is a science fiction anthology series I'm working on called Vanishing Point, which comes out in 2025.
Hmm.
And all the stories are kind of they all kind of have twists. They're sort of like Twilight Zone episodes. But there's two in particular where I thought this is like the sort I wanted them to be the first two issues because I thought each of them like completely so subverts the reader's expectations. Like you think one thing's happening, and
Hmm.
then you just get hit with this like game changing sort of paradigm shift
Yeah,
towards the end of the issue. That I wanted those to sort of be the first couple of issues, just one because I think more people will read the first couple of issues than
yeah.
probably and also just because I wanted people to sit right off the bat tell people this is the kind of series it is.
I feel like this is where movies kind of have the advantage in a way. Because when you watch a movie, you're committed. Like, you're not gonna leave the theater halfway because you're bored. You already paid for the
Right.
movie, you're gonna stay there. But
Right.
with TV shows and comic books, I mean, like, a person reads the first few pages of the comic book before they go buy it, right? So you kind of have to be kind of grab them by the throat, but like stay here in the first few like first few pages. TV shows a little bit linear because you get to like st they'll probably stay till the last end of the episode. But that's where I feel like the storytelling is very different, if that makes sense.
Right. There's a lot of like off ramp points.
Hmm.
There's a lot of point where anybody can quit. Your the other sort of disadvantage of comics is they come out once a month, whereas like a streaming series of a TV show is like once a week. And
Hmm.
like obviously a movie, there's no, I mean, you just are in, you're buckled into the roller coaster the minute it begins, and you just stay there till
Yeah.
the end. It's like really hard to keep people's attention when people read like 20 pages. Probably took them less than a half hour to read your comic, and then they got to wait for a month until the next one.
Hmm.
So that's like so much harder for comics to maintain people's attention than either of those two other mediums.
Have you ever written like a one shot before?
Yeah, I write a lot of one shots. In fact, the reason why I started writing that science fiction anthology series because it's a way to make an entire series out of one shots. Basically, each
Hmm.
story is completely independent, takes place in a different universe. But I can market it both as a series or as it's like if you just walk in and buy issue number 4 or 5, then it's as good as buying issue one.
Yeah.
You're not lost or anything. Yeah, I feel like some of the best issues I've written have been one shots just because they you don't have to they're not dependent upon any sort of prior knowledge, or you don't have to like follow up and read the next one for it to make sense.
Yeah. So do you feel your writing style changes when you write those things? Because it's kind of like a movie, right? Like with one shots. Because they're kind of buckled in for like that one issue.
Yeah, I think a big difference when you're writing a one shot versus when you're writing a series is that there's not really much time for character development in a one shot. The characters are pretty much who they are
Hmm.
in that issue, and they don't change a lot. It's the story. In a one shot, it's the story that changes. The characters stay kind of the same, or maybe they have a big revelation at the end, but characters don't change over time like they do in a series. Whereas a series is kind of the opposite. It's like the characters are the ones who people are reading for, and they're the ones who sort of evolve over time, and the story's not necessarily the thing that drives what people are reading.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you've watched this podcast episode with Tarantino, but he was saying that television shows are kind of like a soap opera. And then TV show, not TV, and movies are kind of like a lot of information that leads up to this one scene. And it's like you remember that scene forever. But with a TV show, you kind of forget like 90% of the story because there's too
Yeah, what you
much.
remember in the TV show is the characters. It's like people who love Friends, don't necessarily remember. I mean, they don't. It's not that they loved this story or what. It's that they love, Chandler or Monica or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that they've shown that, like in a movie, the scenes that you're most likely to remember are the end scene, the beginning scene, and then your favorite scene in the movie. And those are kind of the three things people tend to remember about a movie. And over time they forget about everything else.
Yeah. So which one do you prefer personally?
I think I prefer the movie approach.
Mm-hmm. Why?
I think because when I tell a story, it's usually kind of like because there's something I want to talk about in society. There's like a metaphor that I'm making, and that's what's important to me. So I want them to like have that as the takeaway, not necessarily just falling in love with the character.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think I like it when I write a lot of like drama, I'd say. Not really like drama, like soap opera drama, more like conflicts between people. I like internal conflicts the most. So I feel like when I write a story, I write it so that it's a movie, but it kind of feels like a bit of a soap opera, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Huh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you read any, I mean, you probably did. Did you watch any movies growing up?
Oh yeah, no, I watch movies all the time. I've loved going to movies for as long as I can remember. I still remember the first movie I went to. I still remember seeing Bambi in like the theater when I was like 3 or 4 years old, just because it was such a marvelous experience. It's like to get in the car and go somewhere, and then you're sitting in this giant dark theater. I'd never experienced anything like that up to
Uh-huh.
that point. It just felt really majestic to me.
Do you feel like that moment like changed your life? You're like, oh my God, I want to make movies now.
I don't think that I necessarily wanted to make movies, but I knew I'd always wanted to watch them.
Mm. Do you ever want your comics to like become a film someday?
Oh yeah, no, and there's several that they're talking about making into a film, but I would love that. I would absolutely love to see one of my comics get adapted to a movie.
Do you have like an ultimate career goal for your writing?
Yeah, well, to make enough money to do it for the rest of my life is my career goal.
I feel like that's your everyday goal. You're like trying to find a job.
Yeah, no, it'd be nice to not have to worry. It would be nice to like, okay, you can work this week or this month or not, and you'll still be able to write. I would
Hmm.
like to not have the gun to my head where I have to start, keep hitting deadlines and keep getting new gigs to do it. I would like to be financially secure enough that I could just write when I want to write. But if I had to choose, I would definitely take the gun to my head and the deadlines over not writing.
Yeah. Would you rather, are you more of like a outliner or someone who just writes as he goes? You know, like
More,
write.
I always do an outline, but I feel like for me, writing is mostly writing as I go. I feel like the outline is usually kind of just to trick my editor into convincing them that I have a plan, and then but it's when I'm actually writing the story that I figure out what it is that I'm saying
Mhm.
and a lot of times my scripts, my stories don't bear a lot of relationship to the outline that I turned in, but I think that's what people know they're getting into when they hire me, so it's okay.
Have you ever had a moment where the editor goes like, I don't like this, and you're like, well, I'm not gonna change that.
Yeah, there's some times where it's like editor will say I didn't like this, but you sort of say, well, this is important to me, and usually they're pretty good about it. I think editors, you view their advice unless it's something that like standards and practices or legal is coming down on, like this is a DC comic, you can't have Spider-Man show up, then that's absolute, you're not going to get away with putting Spider-Man in a DC comic, but for the most part, editors are willing to sort of work with you, or if you're really willing to like fight for something, they'll let you have it.
Do you have an example like of when it happened?
uh I can One doesn't really pop to my mind, but and they're usually kind of small, but
Okay.
yeah.
Is your family a, like creative people?
No, not really. I mean, they are, but they're not like creatives. They're not like, they don't work in the arts or storytelling. They all have kind of normal jobs like I did.
Do they ever read your comics?
Sometimes, yeah, my brother reads a lot of my comics, and weirdly, none of them were like comics people, including me. None of us were like big comic book fans until
Mhm.
I started writing comics. But yeah, usually they'll buy something just because I wrote it. I don't know if they collect or read any other comics other than ones I write,
Mhm.
but they definitely seem to get a kick out of the fact that I'm doing it.
Did you ever go to school for writing?
No, I thought about it. I thought about going to get my master's degree in writing, getting a master of fine arts, to study writing. But then it occurred to me that I could just actually write, and that would be like my graduate school, and I wouldn't have to pay $50,000 to someone
Mhm.
else for the privilege of writing. And I think that was I think that was the best decision.
I feel like if you go to school for writing, they'll kind of teach you what you should write, and I feel like that strips of you of your unique way of writing in a sense.
Yeah, there's a fine line between teaching someone creative writing and teaching them how to write like you do. And I don't want to like really go to school. I don't encourage anyone to go to school to learn how to write like someone else does. What I would encourage you to do is to find your own voice, to find the writing that is like sounds. I think you make your biggest advances as a writer when your words on the page began to sound more and more like the words in your head. You begin to sound like yourself, and that's the key, is to like not have this sort of pretentious or this affected voice in your writing, to not worry about the style, you just worry about sounding like yourself, to make it sound like these are the things that I think about, these are the things I care about the most, and this is my voice.
Hmm. Yeah. I always tell people, I think I've said this like 100 times now, but if you like writing it, someone else will enjoy reading it.
Yeah, we're not that unique, where if I like something, that's kind of what I tell myself.
Yeah.
If I think something's good, there's probably a million other people out there who will think it's good.
Hmm. I mean, I feel like you can look at it a bad way, like, oh, I'm not unique, I'm not gonna stand up. But also you can be like, I'm not unique, so people will think the same way as me, and since I'm
Yeah.
enjoying this, someone else will enjoy this.
Yeah, no, I think that's the way to look at it. It's like we are, we're this is what how we find sort of feeling of like communion or a community with other people. It's like we kind of are into the same things.
Mm,
So it's like it's a good thing that you aren't the only person in the planet into the same things that you're thinking of, or the only one thinking about this. It's good
mm,
that there's a lot of other people thinking the same things we are, because then it means that we can actually connect with each other over things that matter to us.
hmm. I feel a lot of people try to like have a hard time trying to motivate themselves to write, right? How do you keep yourself motivated?
Well, aside from the money, which I have to keep earning, there is also, it's just what I enjoy doing. And it's not so much the physical act of writing. It's not sitting down on a laptop and punching the keys that I enjoy. It's
Mm,
just the sort of thinking, like you. I like thinking about it when I'm at the gym or when I'm in the shower. I like having something to sort of like that sort of takes over my mind and transports me to another time and place. And that's kind of what writing is to me. It's like a prompt for my mind to be doing, its best work.
sounds like you don't struggle with procrastination. I do a little
No,
bit.
well, I mean, I do sometimes if it's like something I'm not looking forward to writing or something that I just am not as excited about other things. I try to put it off and write the thing. I always try to write the thing I'm most excited about at the time because I feel like
Yeah.
that's the one I'm going to do the most pages and get the most done. But eventually, you do have to write the things that you're not as excited about.
Yeah. So, Mark, what's one advice you'd give to the aspiring storytellers watching this right now?
I would say keep, at least when you're starting, keep your stories as short as possible because that will train you to think what is absolutely necessary to the story. And it will
Hmm.
also make your stories inherently more interesting to other people.
I feel like people overestimate their ideas, right? If you think
Right.
that like, oh, this is not going to be enough. If you actually write it down, you'll realize a small story can be like stretched out really hard. And
Right.
it, yeah.
And I think that the advantage of writing a small story is it forces you to think about what's important about the story. There might be a lot of details you thought about going into the story, but are they really important? Are these things people are going to care about? If not, then you're probably better off without them.
Hmm. Like with my Nova, there's a whole out part with her dad, but he's not even in the story anymore because I figured he's not necessary.
Yeah.
So,
At some point, you realize that this was appealing to you when you thought of it, but you don't
mhm,
have too much to say about it. So it just sort of gets cut out of the final product.
exactly. So, Mark, where can our awesome listeners find your work?
Go to your local comic shop and you can ask for my work. They might have some on the shelves. If not, they can certainly put it on your pull list. And the things that I'm really excited for people to read right now are Traveling to Mars, which I feel like is maybe the best book I've ever written. And it just came out in trade paperback form. And Batman Dark Age, which is a Batman story with artwork by Mike Allred.
Sounds so awesome. I'm gonna go look for those. Well, thank you so much, Mark. That's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your incredible insights.
Well, thanks for
And
having me. It was a lot of fun.
I learned so much. And it's so interesting and so crazy. I hope to become a famous writer like you. We'll see.
Good luck.
And I'll do my best.
Yes, do your best. If nothing else, have fun. But I hope it works out. I really do.
Yes. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow storytelling enthusiasts. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.